never thought the moment that would crack my entire life open would be a slap. Not a scream, not a betrayal whispered behind closed doors, not even the affair I would later uncover. A slap. Sharp, loud, humiliating. The kind that echoes longer in your chest than it does in the room. The kind that makes your kids freeze like prey animals. The kind that changes how you breathe. It happened in my sister-in-law's kitchen. Marble counters imported from Italy, sunlight spilling in through floor-to-ceiling windows like we were in some damn real estate commercial, and my 7-year-old daughter clutching my leg while my 10-year-old son stared at me like he'd just watched his mom get erased. That was the day I stopped playing nice. That was the day I decided if she wanted a war, I'd burn her perfect life to the studs. For context, my name is Claire. I'm married to Daniel, the younger brother in a family that worships money like it's God. Old money, Connecticut money. We don't talk about numbers because numbers talk about us money. Daniel and I live well, but we're not flashy. He's a corporate attorney. I run a private consulting firm for high net worth clients, the kind of job where discretion is worth more than talent. My sister-in-law, Vanessa, is married to Daniel's older brother, Mark. Mark is the golden boy, hedge fund guy, country club board member, the one their parents brag about at charity galas. Vanessa slid into that world like she was born for it. Perfect hair, perfect smile, designer clothes that whispered instead of screamed. Everyone loved her. Everyone except me. And even I didn't hate her at first. I just felt watched, like a bug under glass. Vanessa had a way of making every room tilt toward her. Conversations bent around her opinions. People laughed a beat too hard at her jokes. She never raised her voice. She never lost her composure. She'd smile while cutting you open, then act confused when you bled. Early on, I chalked it up to insecurity on my part. Upper-class families run on subtle dominance games. I thought I was just new to the area. But over the years, little things started piling up. Comments about my parenting that sounded like concern, but landed like judgment. "Oh, wow, Claire, you let them eat sugar after 6? Or the way she'd rearrange my kitchen when she visited, claiming she was helping, while my kids watched their home get corrected. Or how she'd casually mention private things I'd only told my mother-in-law, then tilt her head and say, "Oh, did I say that out loud?" like it was cute. The slap didn't come out of nowhere. It was the end of a long fuse I didn't even realize she'd lit. That weekend, the entire family had gathered at Vanessa and Mark's place in Westchester for a birthday brunch. Their house was obscene. Infinity pool, home gym bigger than my entire first apartment, art that required explanations. My kids were already overwhelmed, trying not to touch anything while Vanessa's 2 daughters ran wild because rules apparently didn't apply when you had money. The tension started when my son accidentally knocked over a decorative tray. Nothing broke. He apologized immediately. I bent down to comfort him, but Vanessa swooped in first, her hand landing hard on his shoulder. "We don't raise clumsy children here," she said lightly, smiling like she'd said something adorable. My son flinched. That's when I stepped in. I told her, calmly, to please not touch my child. Her smile tightened. Something dark flickered behind her eyes. And then, later, when I pulled her aside in the kitchen and asked her to respect my boundaries, that's when she snapped. She told me I was ungrateful, that I was lucky to even be in their orbit, that my kids needed discipline because God knows where they'll end up otherwise. I told her she didn't get to talk about my children like that. She laughed. Then she slapped me. Full force, open hand, in front of both my kids, who had followed me into the kitchen without me realizing it. The sound was sickening. Mark rushed in. Daniel froze. Vanessa immediately started crying, saying I'd threatened her, that I was unhinged. And here's the thing that still makes my stomach turn. Everyone hesitated. No one immediately defended me. Not one person said, "What the hell did you just do?" That silence told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in that family. We left. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I picked up my kids, walked past the marble island where Vanessa stood sobbing into a silk napkin, and walked out. In the car, my daughter asked me if she'd done something wrong. My son stared out the window, jaw clenched like a grown man. That night, after I tucked them in, I went into my office, shut the door, and let myself feel it. The humiliation, the rage, the fear. But beneath all of it, something else was waking up. Focus. Because here's the dirty secret Vanessa didn't know about me. I make my living by uncovering what rich people hide. I see how the sausage gets made. I know where the bodies are buried because I'm paid to keep them from being found. And Vanessa, she was sloppy. I didn't decide to expose her out of revenge. Not at first. At first, I just wanted the truth. I wanted to understand why she felt so comfortable crossing that line. People like her don't lose control unless they think they're untouchable. So I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I replayed every interaction, every offhand comment, every time she'd looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. And patterns emerged. Money moving strangely, whispered phone calls that stopped when I entered the room, Mark's sudden absences, Vanessa's need to control narratives before anyone even questioned them. I remembered the time she'd bragged about handling a problem with a former friend who'd tried to cause trouble. At the time, I thought she meant socially. Now, I wasn't so sure. The first thing I did was protect my kids. I documented everything. Dates, times, witnesses. I took photos of the faint red mark on my cheek. I wrote down my kids' statements verbatim. I contacted a family therapist, not because my kids were broken, but because I wanted a professional record. Then I turned my attention outward. Vanessa lived in a glass house, and I was done pretending not to see the cracks. I reached out to an old client, someone who owed me a favor, someone very good at finding financial anomalies. I didn't tell him names at first. I just asked hypothetical questions. If a hedge fund manager's wife were laundering money through shell charities, how would it look? If someone were having an affair with a board member's spouse, how sloppy would they have to be to get caught? His answers made my skin prickle because they sounded familiar. Daniel noticed the change in me before anyone else. He asked me what I was doing, why I was suddenly working late, why his phone buzzed every time a family group chat message came. I told him the truth. Not all of it, just enough. He was torn. He believed me about the slap. He was furious about the kids. But Mark was his brother. Their parents were already pressuring him to smooth things over. Vanessa had sent a gift basket with an apology note that somehow made the whole thing my fault. It was, I hope we can all move past this misunderstanding, like she hadn't assaulted me. Daniel wanted peace. I wanted justice. And deep down, I knew those two things were about to collide. The night everything shifted was a Thursday. I was alone in my office, scrolling through documents I shouldn't have access to yet, when I found it. A transaction that didn't make sense. Then another. Then a pattern. My heart started pounding, because if I was right, Vanessa wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. And she had been hiding behind her perfect life, her perfect smile, her role as the charming wife, while doing things that could ruin people, including me. I leaned back and once I made the decision, everything sharpened. Sounds felt louder, colors harsher. Even my own thoughts started lining up like soldiers instead of spiraling like they usually did when stress hit. I didn't tell Daniel what I'd found yet, not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew him. He would try to be fair. He would want proof that could survive daylight, not just my instincts and a few suspicious spreadsheets. Fairness was a luxury Vanessa had already taken from me the second her hand connected with my face in front of my children. So I worked quietly. I worked like my kids' future depended on it, because in a way, it did. Vanessa's world ran on appearances, charity boards, fundraisers, women's luncheons where everyone pretended they didn't see each other's Botox settling. I'd always found those events exhausting, but now I saw them for what they really were. Information exchanges wrapped in champagne and smiles. I started showing up again, wearing the right clothes, laughing at the right jokes, letting people assume the slap incident had been blown out of proportion, because that's what they wanted to believe. Vanessa noticed immediately. Her eyes followed me like lasers at the first event after the brunch disaster. She came over, air-kissed my cheek like nothing had happened, murmured something about fresh starts. I smiled back and thanked her for the gift basket. I watched relief flicker across her face. That was my first real confirmation. She thought she'd gotten away with it. People who feel safe make mistakes. I started small, cross-checking public records, non-profits Vanessa was associated with, foundations that sounded altruistic but had vague missions and even vaguer financial disclosures. It wasn't hard to find irregularities once I knew where to look. Large donations cycling through the same 3 entities, always just under thresholds that would trigger automatic audits. Expenses categorized as consulting fees, paid to companies with no real digital footprint. Shells, amateur ones. I pulled threads carefully, aware that one wrong move could tip her off. At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Daniel breathe, wondering how deep this went, wondering how someone could smile at my kids while doing things like this, wondering how many other people she'd hurt. Meanwhile, the family narrative was being rewritten without my consent. My mother-in-law called to suggest I apologize for my part in the misunderstanding. Mark sent a text saying Vanessa had been under a lot of stress. Stress. Like that excused violence. Like my kid's fear was collateral damage. Daniel defended me, but I could feel the strain on him. Family loyalty is a heavy thing. It bends good people into shapes they don't recognize. Vanessa leveraged that expertly. She hosted another gathering, invited everyone except us, then sent a message saying she'd hoped we'd come, but didn't want to make things uncomfortable. Suddenly, I was the problem, the unstable one, the woman who couldn't let things go. That's when I realized exposure wasn't just about revealing her crimes. It was about reclaiming the narrative. Vanessa thrived on controlling stories, so I started collecting witnesses, quietly. I reached out to a woman I vaguely knew from a charity board, someone Vanessa had once been close to and then abruptly dropped. We met for coffee. She was nervous, glancing around like Vanessa might materialize behind her. When I asked gently why she'd left the board, her eyes filled with tears. She told me Vanessa had pressured her to sign off on expenses that didn't feel right. When she refused, rumors started circulating about her mental health, her marriage, her reliability. She'd stepped down to protect herself. Another piece clicked into place. This wasn't new behavior. This was a pattern. The more I dug, the uglier it got. Affairs weren't my initial focus, but they surfaced anyway. Hotel charges disguised as conference travel, late-night calls to a number saved under a woman's name that wasn't in Vanessa's social circle. Eventually, with the help of my contact, I confirmed it. Vanessa was having an affair with a married man who sat on the board of one of the very charities she was siphoning money from. Mutually assured destruction. They'd protected each other, covered tracks, used influence to silence questions. And Mark? Either he was willfully blind or he was complicit. That part hurt more than I expected. Mark had always been distant but polite with me. The idea that he might know what his wife was doing and choose to protect her made my stomach churn. At home, my kids were processing things in their own ways. My daughter became clingy, asking if Aunt Vanessa was mad at her. My son grew quiet, angry in a way that scared me. I put him in therapy too. Not because he was broken, but because I refused to let Vanessa's violence ripple unchecked through my children's lives. Watching them navigate emotions they were too young to name hardened my resolve. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about safety, accountability, making sure no one ever laid a hand on my kid's mother again and got away with it. Daniel finally confronted me one night after I'd stayed up until 3 compiling documents. He asked me point blank what I was planning. I told him everything. Not just about the slap, but about the money, the affair, the manipulation. I showed him what I had. He went pale, angry, conflicted. He asked me if I was sure, if he realized what this could do to the family. I told him I didn't care. That family watched me get hit and hesitate, that my loyalty ended there. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said he was proud of me, that he should have done more sooner, that whatever I decided, he'd back me. I cried then, quietly, because carrying something this heavy alone wears you down in ways you don't notice until someone offers to take some of the weight. Vanessa sensed the shift before I made any overt move. She started reaching out more, inviting us over, sending texts asking about the kids. It was almost funny how transparent it became once I knew her tells. The false concern, the sudden warmth, the way she tried to re-establish control by proximity. I played along just enough to keep her calm. I needed time to make sure when I pulled the trigger there would be no going back. Because exposing someone like Vanessa isn't like flipping a switch. You get one shot, and if you miss, they come for you harder. The breaking point came when my son overheard. The moment you decide to stop protecting someone who's been hurting you, the world shifts. It doesn't get quieter, it gets louder. Every interaction feels loaded, every smile suspicious. I started seeing Vanessa everywhere, not physically, but in the way her influence lingered, the way people paused before answering my texts, the way invitations stopped coming, the way my mother-in-law's voice tightened when she asked how the kids were, like she was checking for cracks. Vanessa wasn't just a person, she was a system, and I was about to tear it down. The attorney I hired didn't flinch when I laid everything out. He didn't gasp, he didn't moralize. He leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and said, "This woman has been playing a long game." That sentence chilled me more than anything else, because it meant I wasn't crazy. It meant the unease I'd felt for years wasn't insecurity. It was instinct. He told me we needed to be strategic, that people like Vanessa didn't just fall, they retaliated hard. He asked me if I was prepared for that. I told him I'd been preparing my whole life without realizing it. We started with the assault. That was the anchor, the tangible act of violence that cut through social ambiguity. My kids' therapist provided statements about the emotional impact. The photos showed the red mark clearly. The timeline was airtight. Vanessa had already tried to get ahead of it by telling people I'd lunged at her, but stories like that unravel when subjected to light, especially when children are involved. The police report was filed quietly, but word has a way of leaking in wealthy circles. Whispers started. I could feel it. Vanessa stopped calling. Mark sent a terse message asking if we could talk privately. I didn't respond. At the same time, the financial investigation ramped up. Subpoenas went out to the charities. Auditors started asking uncomfortable questions. Board members who'd once smiled at Vanessa over cocktails suddenly couldn't get meetings fast enough. I watched from a distance as her world began to wobble. She still posted curated photos online, perfect lighting, inspirational captions, but the cracks were there if you knew how to look. Comments disabled, tags removed, a subtle retreat from public-facing roles. Vanessa was used to controlling the narrative, but now the narrative was moving faster than she could spin it. She showed up at my house unannounced one afternoon, while Daniel was at work. I saw her car through the window and felt my pulse spike. I told my kids to stay upstairs and locked my office door. When I opened the front door, she looked smaller somehow. Still polished, still beautiful, but her eyes were sharp with panic. She tried to smile. I didn't invite her in. She said she wanted to clear the air. I told her to leave. She dropped the act then. Her voice went cold. She told me I was making a mistake, that I didn't understand how things worked, that people like us didn't win against people like her. I laughed. Actually laughed, and told her she should have thought about that before she hit me. She stared at me like she'd finally seen something she couldn't control. Then she left. That encounter confirmed what my attorney had warned me about. Vanessa wouldn't go quietly. Within days, rumors escalated. Someone anonymously tipped off a parent at my kid's school that I was unstable. The administration called me in for a meeting. I walked in with documentation, therapist letters, and my attorney on speed dial. The meeting ended with apologies, but the intent was clear. She was trying to isolate me, undermine me, make me doubt myself. It almost worked. There were nights I lay awake, heart racing, imagining worst-case scenarios, imagining her smiling as my life imploded. That's the insidious thing about people like Vanessa. They make you question your own reality. Daniel was my anchor. He handled his family with the restraint I admired. He refused to engage in gossip. He told his parents the truth, calmly, repeatedly, that Vanessa had assaulted me, that there was evidence, that investigations were ongoing. His father accused him of overreacting. His mother cried. Mark stopped speaking to him entirely. The fracture was complete. Holidays loomed like battlefields. I wondered how we'd explain to the kids why they wouldn't see their cousins anymore. Then I remembered how my daughter had flinched when Vanessa raised her voice once, even before the slap, and the decision made itself. The affair came out sooner than I expected, not because I leaked it, but because secrets rot from the inside. The man involved panicked when auditors started digging. He confessed to his wife. She went nuclear. Board resignations followed, donations froze. Vanessa's name started appearing in places she couldn't scrub. Mark confronted her. That much I learned through a mutual acquaintance who'd suddenly found religion and needed to come clean. The image of that confrontation haunted me. I didn't take pleasure in it, I took relief, because finally, she wasn't the only one deciding who knew what. Vanessa tried one last tactic. She sent me a letter through her attorney offering a settlement, money in exchange for silence, a mutual non-disclosure, a promise to move forward amicably. I stared at that letter for a long time. The amount was obscene, life-changing, the kind of money that makes problems disappear. For a split second, I imagined saying yes, taking my kids on a long vacation, starting fresh somewhere far away. But then I pictured my son asking if someone could take him away because his mom was unstable. I pictured my daughter watching a grown woman hit her mother and get away with it, and I tore the letter in half. The legal process was brutal. Depositions, interviews, endless waiting punctuated by moments of terror. Vanessa denied everything, of course, claimed I was orchestrating a smear campaign out of jealousy, that I'd always resented her lifestyle. The classic playbook. But lies have a shelf life, especially when money trails exist, especially when multiple women started coming forward with eerily similar stories of manipulation, coercion, quiet threats. Vanessa's charm curdled into something ugly under scrutiny. People began distancing themselves. Invitations dried up. Her social media went dark. One night, months into the process, my kids asked me if things would ever be normal again. I told them the truth, that normal changes, that sometimes doing the right thing means things get worse before they get better. My son nodded like he understood more than he should at his age. My daughter hugged me and said she was proud of me. I went into my bedroom afterward and cried until my chest hurt, because strength isn't loud, it's exhausting. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived gray and cold. Vanessa sat across the room from me, impeccably dressed, jaw tight. She didn't look at me. Mark sat beside her, hollow-eyed. When the evidence was presented, the photos, the statements, the financial records, I felt something lift, like I'd been holding my breath for years without realizing it. The judge ordered further proceedings. Investigations would continue. No sweeping victory yet, but it was enough. Enough to know I wasn't alone. Enough to know the truth had weight. As we walked out, Vanessa finally looked at me. There was no hatred in her eyes, just fear. And in that moment, I understood something important. She hadn't slapped me because she was angry. She'd slapped me because she was afraid. Afraid of being seen. Afraid of losing control. And now, that fear belonged to her alone. Fear changes people. I saw it take root in Vanessa after the hearing, blooming into something sharp and desperate. She stopped being subtle. The polished mask cracked, and what bled through was entitlement mixed with panic. That combination is dangerous. People with nothing left to lose don't follow rules, and Vanessa still had plenty to lose: her reputation, her marriage, her access. She started circling, trying to figure out how to regain control of a story that had slipped through her fingers, and I could feel it, like pressure in the air before a storm. The first sign came through Mark. He called Daniel late one night, voice strained, asking if we could please talk like adults. Daniel put the call on speaker without telling him. Mark said Vanessa was not doing well, that the stress was getting to her, that she felt attacked and isolated, that maybe, just maybe, I could consider dropping the assault charge to let everyone heal. I felt my jaw tighten. Heal? Like healing involved erasing what she'd done? I took the phone from Daniel and told Mark, calmly, that his wife had traumatized my children and attempted to destroy my credibility as a mother. I told him I wasn't responsible for her mental health. I told him the only way this ended was with accountability. He hung up on me. I didn't feel bad. Vanessa's social world collapsed faster than I expected. Upper-class circles are ruthless when scandal hits. People who once adored her now avoided eye contact. Charities quietly removed her name from websites. Luncheon invites stopped. The same women who'd laughed at her jokes now whispered behind manicured hands. She went from queen bee to liability in a matter of weeks. I watched it happen with a strange mix of vindication and dread. Because when someone like Vanessa loses her audience, she looks for a new stage, and sometimes that stage is your life. She escalated again by targeting my business. Anonymous complaints were filed with a regulatory body alleging misconduct. They were vague, clearly fishing expeditions, but enough to trigger an inquiry. I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. My firm was airtight. Years of operating in high-stakes environments had taught me the value of documentation. The inquiry went nowhere, but the intent rattled me. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about punishment. She wanted me exhausted, distracted, afraid. I refused to give her that satisfaction. At home, Daniel and I operated like a unit. We installed additional security, changed routines, made sure the kids were never alone. I hated that it came to that, hated that someone else's choices forced this hypervigilance on our family. But I also felt a grim pride. We were adapting. We weren't shrinking. The kids sensed the tension, of course. My son asked if Aunt Vanessa was a bad person. I told him people make bad choices, that sometimes they hurt others to protect themselves. He thought about that and said, "So she was trying to protect her lies?" I stared at him, stunned. Kids see everything. The financial case broke wide open when a forensic accountant uncovered direct transfers linking Vanessa to a shell company used to funnel money out of a charity meant for domestic violence survivors. That detail made my blood run cold. The irony was obscene. Money meant to help abused women had been lining the pockets of a woman who had abused me. When that information surfaced, even Vanessa's remaining defenders fell silent. There was no spinning that, no reframing. The press got hold of it, carefully worded articles started appearing, using phrases like alleged Vanessa tried to contact me directly again, this time through a mutual acquaintance who begged me to meet her as a human being. I refused. I was done negotiating with someone who saw kindness as weakness. Instead, I focused on the legal proceedings. The assault charge moved forward. The financial case grew teeth. Mark filed for a separation. That news hit me unexpectedly hard, not because I felt sorry for Vanessa, but because I saw the ripple effect. Kids caught in the crossfire, a family imploding. I reminded myself that I hadn't caused this. She had. Accountability feels cruel when you're used to impunity. The day Vanessa was formally charged with multiple counts related to financial fraud, I was at my daughter's school recital. She stood on stage in a blue dress, singing with her whole chest, eyes scanning the audience until she found me. She smiled, bright and fearless. My phone buzzed in my purse with a news alert. I didn't check it until later. That moment belonged to her. and it grounded me in a way nothing else could. This fight was never about me alone. It was about modeling something for my kids, that you don't accept abuse, that you don't buy silence with money, that truth matters even when it costs you. Vanessa didn't attend the next hearing. Her attorney cited medical reasons. Rumors swirled about rehab, about breakdowns, about desperate attempts to flee the country. None of it mattered to me anymore. The process moved forward with or without her. Witnesses testified. Documents were entered into record. Each piece chipped away at the image she'd curated so carefully. I felt a strange emptiness as it happened. I'd imagined this would feel triumphant. Instead, it felt sobering. Power doesn't disappear quietly. It fights, and when it loses, it leaves wreckage. My mother-in-law finally came to see me. She looked older, smaller, like the illusion of control she'd maintained for decades had slipped. She apologized, not for doubting me initially, but for not protecting my children. That distinction mattered. I accepted it. We cried together. It wasn't a clean reconciliation, but it was honest. She told me she'd enabled Vanessa because it was easier than confronting the truth. I told her that was how people like Vanessa thrive. Silence is their oxygen. As the months dragged on, I started reclaiming parts of myself I'd put on hold. I slept better. I laughed more. The constant edge dulled. The kids relaxed. The house felt lighter. Justice isn't just about verdicts. It's about restoring balance, about taking back space that fear once occupied. I knew there was still a long road ahead, sentencing, civil suits, fallout, but the worst was behind us. Vanessa's control was broken. The last time I saw her in person was accidental. We crossed paths in a courthouse hallway. She looked nothing like the woman who'd slapped me in her perfect kitchen. Her clothes were still expensive, but they hung differently. Her posture was defensive. She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was seeing me for the first time without the filter of superiority. For a moment, I saw regret, or maybe it was just fear of consequences. Either way, I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just closure. She looked away first. Walking out of that building, I held Daniel's hand and breathed in cold air like it was medicine. I thought about the woman I'd been before the slap, the one who swallowed discomfort to keep peace, the one who doubted her instincts. That woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, yes, but also freer. Vanessa had tried to break me in front of my children. Instead, she taught me exactly how strong I could be. And the final chapters of this story were still unwritten, but for the first time, I knew how they would end. With truth, with accountability, and with a kind of justice money can't buy. By the time winter settled in, the world had shifted so much that it felt like we were living in the aftermath of a storm. Not the dramatic part where windows shatter as sirens scream, but the quieter stretch afterward when everything is damp and stripped bare and you're left counting what survived. Vanessa's name had become shorthand for scandal in certain circles. People didn't say it out loud unless they had to. They'd lower their voices, lean in, say things like, "that situation," or "Mark's wife," as if saying her name might stain them by association. Power doesn't vanish overnight. It leaks away, slowly, painfully, until there's nothing left but residue. Mark moved out of their house. That detail reached me through Daniel's parents, who now spoke to us with a careful politeness, like they were relearning how to be decent humans. The house went on the market quietly, listed through a private broker. Vanessa stayed somewhere undisclosed. Rumors said a rental in the city, something temporary, something smaller. I didn't ask. I didn't need to know. Distance was a gift. I took it. The civil suits followed the criminal charges like dominoes. Charities demanded restitution. Board members sued to recover funds. Former friends turned plaintiffs. The same people who once toasted Vanessa at galas now submitted sworn statements detailing her intimidation tactics. I read some of them during discovery and felt sick. Not because I was surprised, but because of how familiar the language was. The subtle threats, the gaslighting, the way she framed cruelty as concern. It was all there, laid bare in legal language. Vindication is a strange thing. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like gravity finally doing its job. Vanessa's attorney reached out again, this time with a different tone, less arrogance, more desperation. They floated the idea of a plea, reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. My attorney asked me what I wanted. That question stopped me cold. What did I want? Not revenge, not money. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted the record to reflect what she'd done. I wanted my children to grow up knowing their mother stood up and didn't flinch. I told him I wanted the truth on paper and consequences that matched the harm. He nodded. He understood. The assault charge became personal again when Vanessa attempted to recant her earlier statements and claimed she'd been provoked. Her legal team tried to paint me as aggressive, unstable, volatile. It was textbook, but this time the judge wasn't buying it. Too much evidence, too many inconsistencies. When the ruling came down that the case would proceed to trial if no plea was reached, I felt my knees weaken. Trials are brutal, public, unpredictable. I didn't want my kids anywhere near that circus. My attorney assured me we'd push for a resolution that spared them. Still, the fear lingered. Vanessa had already shown she didn't care who she hurt. Daniel struggled in ways he didn't always voice. Losing his brother, even temporarily, cut deeper than he admitted. He'd grown up in Mark's shadow, always trying to keep up, always seeking approval. Watching Mark unravel alongside Vanessa forced him to confront things he'd ignored for years. We talked more than we ever had, about loyalty, about boundaries, about how money distorts love. Those conversations were painful and necessary. Our marriage came out stronger, forged in something real instead of obligation. The kids adjusted in their own ways. My son became fiercely protective, quick to step between his sister and anything he perceived as a threat. My daughter asked thoughtful questions about fairness and consequences. We answered honestly, in age-appropriate ways. We didn't villainize Vanessa, but we didn't excuse her either. We framed it as a lesson about choices, about how being grown doesn't mean being right, about how apologizing doesn't erase harm. I watched them absorb it and felt a quiet pride. Trauma doesn't have to define you. It can also clarify you. Then came the leak. Someone, still anonymous, released details of Vanessa's affair to a major outlet. It exploded, headlines everywhere. The married man involved resigned from his remaining positions. His wife filed for divorce and spoke publicly about betrayal. Vanessa became a cautionary tale. The comments were brutal. Strangers dissected her face, her clothes, her motives. I stopped reading after the first few. Watching a person get publicly flayed is not as satisfying as people imagine. It's ugly, dehumanizing. And even though she'd earned consequences, I didn't want to become someone who fed on that. Vanessa finally agreed to a plea deal. Guilty to multiple counts, restitution, probation, community service ironically tied to financial oversight programs. The assault charge resulted in a conviction as well. The judge cited the presence of children as an aggravating factor. Hearing that aloud made my chest. The strange thing about aftermath is how quiet it gets. Once the chaos burns itself out, you're left with echoes. That was my life for a while. Echoes of courtrooms, whispered apologies, slammed doors that no longer existed. Vanessa's shadow lingered less each day, but the space she'd vacated felt enormous. I didn't miss her. I missed the version of myself that hadn't been forced to armor up. Healing doesn't mean reverting, it means rebuilding with different materials. Mark eventually reached out, not to me directly, but to Daniel. He wanted to talk, not to defend Vanessa, not to negotiate, just to explain. They met at a neutral place, a quiet bar far from the clubs they used to frequent. Daniel came home that night looking wrecked. He told me Mark had admitted he'd known about the money, at least partially, that he'd convinced himself it wasn't that bad, that everyone did it, that Vanessa would handle it. He'd ignored the affair rumors until evidence shoved it in his face. Hearing that confirmation hurt in a way I hadn't anticipated, not because I cared about Mark's marriage, but because it confirmed how easily people choose comfort over integrity when money is involved. Daniel cried that night. I held him and let him grieve the brother he thought he had. The kids sensed the emotional shift and responded with unexpected maturity. My son started journaling, something his therapist suggested. He let me read one entry where he wrote about feeling angry that grown-ups lie and think kids don't notice. That sentence lodged in my chest. My daughter, meanwhile, became softer, more expressive. She asked more questions about feelings, about why people hurt each other. I answered as honestly as I could. I didn't sugarcoat, but I didn't poison her worldview either. Balance became my mantra. My work took a turn I hadn't planned, but welcomed. Word spread quietly that I'd navigated a high-profile ethical collapse and come out standing. Organizations approached me not just for discretion, but for prevention. They wanted safeguards, oversight, systems that didn't rely on blind trust. I found myself sitting in boardrooms explaining how charismatic leaders manipulate loyalty, how fear silences dissent, how abuse hides behind philanthropy. Every time I spoke, I felt a piece of the past loosen its grip. Power reclaimed is power repurposed. Vanessa tried to rebrand. Of course she did. There were murmurs of personal growth, healing journeys, even whispers about a memoir pitched as a cautionary tale. It went nowhere. People weren't interested in redemption arcs without accountability, especially not when victims included children. Her probation requirements kept her tethered to reality. The hardest part surprised me. It wasn't the public fallout or the legal grind. It was the moments when things felt normal again. Grocery shopping without scanning faces, school pickups without whispered glances. Those moments brought guilt, like enjoying peace meant minimizing what had happened. My therapist helps me reframe it. Healing isn't betrayal, it's survival. Letting joy back in doesn't erase justice, it completes it. Daniel and I took the kids on a trip that summer. Nothing extravagant, a quiet coastal town, rented bikes, ice cream melting too fast. One night, sitting on the beach, my son asked if Aunt Vanessa would ever be nice again. I told him I hoped she'd learn to be kinder, but that being nice wasn't the same as being safe. He nodded, satisfied. Kids don't need perfection, they need honesty. Back home, Daniel's parents made a real effort. Therapy, conversations they'd avoided for decades. They acknowledged their role in enabling toxic dynamics. It wasn't a clean redemption, but it was movement. Boundaries stayed firm. Visits were supervised. No unsupervised access to the kids. No sweeping statements about family first without accountability. They accepted it, chastened. Sometimes justice looks like recalibration instead of rupture. A year after the slap, the civil cases wrapped, settlements finalized, restitution paid. Vanessa's financial world lay in ruins. Mark finalized the divorce and focused on co-parenting. The cousins reconnected slowly, awkwardly, under careful supervision. I watched my kids navigate those interactions with caution and empathy. They were learning discernment, not fear. That felt like a win. The anniversary hit me harder than I expected. Trauma keeps its own calendar. I woke up tense, jaw clenched, replaying that moment in the kitchen, the sound, the shock. I took the day off work, picked up the kids early. We went for a long walk. I told them why the day felt heavy. They listened. My daughter squeezed my hand. My son walked a little closer. That was enough. Late that night, I received an email from Vanessa. Short, no manipulation, no excuses. She said she was working through the consequences of her actions, that she understood now that control wasn't power, that she hoped my children were well. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because closure doesn't require response. Some chapters end without dialogue. As time stretched on, the story lost its heat in public memory. New scandals replaced old ones. That's how it works. But inside our house, something fundamental had shifted. Silence was no longer acceptable. Discomfort became a signal, not something to suppress. My kids grew up watching their mother choose truth over convenience. That legacy mattered more than any verdict. One evening, months later, Daniel and I sat on the porch watching the kids play. He asked me if I'd do it all again, knowing the cost. I didn't answer immediately. I thought about sleepless nights, fractured relationships, the constant vigilance. Then I thought about my daughter's voice on stage, my son's journal, the weight lifted from my chest. I said yes, without hesitation, because some lines once crossed demand a response, and some responses redefine who you are. Vanessa slapped me to remind me of my place. She believed humiliation would silence me. Instead, it sharpened me. It stripped away illusions and forced me to confront the systems that protect abusers in polished spaces. The justice that followed wasn't cinematic. It was methodical, exhausting, incomplete, but it was real, and it changed the trajectory of our lives. The final chapters weren't about her downfall, they were about our rebuilding, and that, in the end, was the most powerful outcome of all. Time has a way of testing the truth you think you've settled into. Just when I believed the hardest part was behind us, life reached back and reminded me that consequences don't always land all at once. Sometimes they circle. Sometimes they wait until you've exhaled before they hit again. Vanessa was quieter, yes, publicly diminished, legally bound, but she was still alive, still thinking, still capable of damage in ways that weren't obvious at first glance. I learned that the hard way. It started with a letter from the school district, routine language, polite concern, a request for a meeting regarding a historical incident that had resurfaced through an anonymous communication. My hands went cold reading it. Historical incident? Anonymous communication? I knew immediately who was behind it. Vanessa couldn't touch me directly anymore, so she'd reached for the longest lever she could find, my children. The letter implied questions about my emotional stability during the period surrounding the assault, questions about whether the stress had impacted my parenting. It was subtle, insidious, exactly her style. I didn't panic. Panic was what she wanted. Instead, I assembled a binder so thick it could have doubled as a weapon. Therapist letters, school records, character references, documentation of every step I'd taken to protect my kids. I walked into that meeting calm, composed, unflinching. The administrators looked uncomfortable. They apologized before I even sat down. The anonymous tip had been vague, unsubstantiated, and frankly inappropriate. They assured me no action would be taken. I nodded, thanked them, and walked out with my head high. But inside, something burned. Vanessa had crossed the one boundary I'd warned her about, again. I contacted my attorney immediately. He was furious. Not surprised, but furious. Vanessa's probation terms were clear about harassment and indirect retaliation. This crossed that line. We filed a motion, another paper trail, another mark against her. I hated that it came to this, hated that my kids' safety still required vigilance, but I also felt something else, resolve hardening into certainty. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about stopping a pattern before it reached another family. The hearing that followed was smaller, quieter, but no less significant. Vanessa appeared via video. She looked tired, thinner, older. When questioned, she denied intent, claimed misunderstanding, suggested coincidence. The judge didn't buy it. Patterns matter. History matters. Context matters. Her probation was amended, stricter terms, mandatory counseling, explicit no-contact clauses that extended to indirect attempts to influence my life. Watching that ruling land felt different from before. Less relief, more finality, like the last nail being driven in. After that, something shifted, not just legally, but emotionally. The constant hum of anticipation faded. For the first time since the slap, I felt truly safe, not invincible, but grounded. I slept through the night without jolting awake. I stopped checking locks twice. The kids relaxed in ways I hadn't fully noticed they'd been tense. Trauma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers until silence returns. Mark reached out again, This time to me directly, a long email, no excuses, no requests, just acknowledgement. He wrote about shame, about complicity, about how losing everything had forced him to confront the man he'd become. He apologized for not stopping Vanessa, for not speaking up, for allowing power to rot his judgment. I read it twice. Then I replied with a short message. I accepted his apology, not because it erased the past, but because carrying resentment would only poison the future. Forgiveness, I've learned, is something you do for yourself first. The kids' relationship with their cousins stabilized. Carefully structured visits, open conversations, no secrets. I watched them navigate those spaces with a maturity that made my chest ache. They asked questions when things felt off. They spoke up when boundaries were crossed. They trusted their instincts. That alone made every sleepless night worth it. Vanessa's greatest miscalculation wasn't underestimating me, it was underestimating what my children would learn from watching me fight back. Professionally, my voice carried more weight than ever. I was invited to speak on panels about ethical leadership, about abuse in elite spaces, about how power shields perpetrators. I told my story without names, without spectacle, but without softening the truth. Rooms went quiet when I described the slap, when I described the silence that followed, when I described the cost of speaking up. People came up to me afterward, eyes bright with recognition, men and women who'd been hurt quietly, who'd been told to keep the peace, who'd swallowed injustice for access. I realized then that this story was bigger than my family. It was systemic, and that gave it meaning beyond pain. Daniel changed too. He stopped bending himself to fit his family's expectations. He became more decisive, more present. He set boundaries without apology. Watching him grow into that strength deepened my love for him in ways I hadn't anticipated. Crisis strips relationships to their core. Ours held. That mattered. One evening, after the kids were asleep, Daniel asked me if I ever felt sorry for Vanessa. The question surprised me. I thought about it honestly. I said I felt sad that she'd chosen control over connection, power over empathy. But sorry? No. Because feeling sorry often becomes another way to excuse harm, and harm, once done, deserves clarity more than pity. Vanessa disappeared from our orbit after the probation amendment. No more letters, no more whispers, no. The final stretch was surreal. Months of hearings, motions, investigations, and tense nights had left a residue on my life that I didn't realize until it started to dissipate. For the first time, the air felt lighter. Windows in the house weren't just glass. They were openings to the outside world, not shields against invisible threats. My kids laughed more freely. Daniel and I could speak without a constant undercurrent of vigilance. The world didn't stop being complicated, but it stopped feeling like a trap. That was the real victory. Vanessa's plea deal was finalized. The courtroom was small, sterile, stripped of drama. I didn't need the spectacle anymore. I didn't want it. I walked in with my attorney, Daniel, and the kid's therapist sitting discreetly behind us. Vanessa appeared, escorted by her own legal team. She looked smaller than I remembered. Still beautiful, impeccably styled, but the arrogance had drained. Fear, exhaustion, and maybe a touch of regret replaced the swagger she used to wield like a weapon. The judge read the terms. Multiple counts of financial fraud, restitution to charities, probation with strict no-contact clauses, mandatory counseling, and the assault conviction. No jail time. That detail stung for a second, but only briefly. Jail doesn't necessarily teach accountability. The consequences she faced would follow her, linger, shadow her reputation permanently. The public record became a permanent ledger of her choices. For me, that was more satisfying than vengeance. It was finality. I looked at my kids during the proceeding. They were quiet, tense, but alert. My son gripped my hand without letting go. My daughter perched on the edge of her seat with wide eyes. I whispered reassurance to them. Not comfort that everything would be perfect, but that justice had been recognized, that their voices mattered, and that boundaries had been enforced. That whisper carried more power than any attorney or judge in the room. Vanessa glanced at me briefly. Her eyes betrayed recognition, not fear exactly, but acknowledgement. She had no control anymore. None. That glance confirmed everything I'd worked for. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply exhaled, quietly, fully, as if letting go of years of tension all at once. After the hearing, we walked outside. The kids raced ahead to the courtyard, their laughter cutting through the crisp air. Daniel held my hand tightly. We didn't speak much at first. Words weren't needed. Victory is often quiet. It's a moment of grounding after turbulence. We watched the sunlight hit their faces, saw their hair fly in the wind, and felt the weight of what had been lifted. I started writing down my reflections, not for publication, but to anchor myself. Trauma has a way of circling if you don't process it. I wrote about the slap in the kitchen, the frozen fear in my children's eyes, and the burning realization that someone I was supposed to trust could violate our home so completely. I wrote about the way power and privilege can shield cruelty and the strength required to fight it. Most importantly, I wrote about my children, their courage, their trust, and how they reminded me every day that truth is a legacy worth fighting for. Life slowly returned to rhythms we had once taken for granted. Mornings without dread, afternoons with laughter, evenings filled with quiet joy instead of anticipation of disruption. Daniel and I created new family traditions: bike rides at sunrise, reading together before bed, Saturday ice cream trips. Those small moments were ordinary, but they carried the extraordinary weight of freedom. My kids learned not just to survive, but to navigate the world with discernment and strength. Vanessa attempted, predictably, to maintain some presence on social media, but her accounts were quiet, sporadic, almost apologetic in tone. She posted vague inspirational quotes about growth, accountability, and transformation, but no one engaged with them the way they used to. Friends and former allies avoided her, and the charities she once dominated refused to associate. She had influence stripped, control denied, and a public record that reflected her misdeeds. That, more than anything, was the lasting consequence. Months later, Daniel and I celebrated our anniversary quietly. No fanfare, no pressure to maintain appearances, just our family in the home we had reclaimed. We spoke about the journey, about the tension, about the fear and the courage. We acknowledged what had been taken from us, but more importantly, we celebrated what had been reclaimed: our dignity, our safety, and our family's integrity. We toasted with sparkling cider. My children were asleep upstairs, oblivious to adult rituals, yet their presence was a constant reminder of why every fight, every tear, every sleepless night had mattered. The final legal paperwork arrived soon after: civil settlements, financial restitution, official acknowledgments of wrongdoing. I signed the last document and felt a weight lift that was almost physical. It wasn't triumph in a traditional sense. It was a deep, reverent peace, the kind that comes from knowing you fought for the right things and refused to bend under injustice. Vanessa's name on those pages no longer carried power. It was just ink, evidence of choices, consequences, and closure. The kids and I spent the afternoon outside, planting flowers in the garden. Each bloom felt symbolic, life pushing through soil, fragile yet resilient. My son asked why the flowers were important. I told him they were reminders that life continues, that growth is possible even after damage, and that nurturing what's right yields beauty over time. My daughter smiled, hands dirty in soil, and said she wanted to help water them every day. That simplicity, that innocence, made every sacrifice worth it. One evening, long after the garden was planted, Daniel and I sat on the porch. He asked me if I felt satisfied, if all the effort, all the fear, all the trauma had been worth it. I looked at him, at the stars, at the quiet home we had fought to protect, and I nodded. Yes, I said, because it wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting our family, preserving truth, and showing our kids how to stand up. That's the kind of justice that matters. The reality of the journey was clear. Vanessa had tried to break me, humiliate me, and destabilize my family. She had failed, not because of luck or wealth or clever manipulation, but because I refused to be silent, because I refused to allow fear to dictate my life, because in the face of betrayal and violence, I chose action, evidence, and the power of integrity. That choice reverberated through every part of our lives. It shaped my children, it reshaped my marriage, and it restored the home we loved. The final emotional chapter unfolded quietly. I was sitting in the living room, watching my children play with toys scattered across the floor, sunlight spilling through the windows, when I felt it, the release. The full weight of years of anxiety, fear, and tension evaporated. I thought of the first day Vanessa struck me, the shock, the anger, the immediate disbelief. I thought of the sleepless nights, the endless documentation, the hearings